didn't. But I did. I decided to go to school that day. After talking it through with my dad, I had decided to go, not because I felt safe, but because I knew I wanted to be able to live with myself if I stayed home and something happened to the kids who could not afford the luxury of a day off. For so many, not going to school means not eating that day. School is an escape from rocky home lives. Some don't have the option to stay behind. I went to school because I would rather die or be wounded among my peers than live with the guilt of not standing by them. That decision I made is not one a child or their parents should ever have to make. I got lucky. I only saw 15 other kids the next day at school, and nothing happened. But it was clear that all of this, the years of drills leading up to that day and today, were not preparing us for if. They have been preparing us for when. The educators and people in power who put us through these drills know this is not a precaution and preparation for a 1 in a million chance. They are preparation for the inevitable. They are preparation for when this will happen. My when hasn't come yet, but at this point in my life, I am sure that it will. I am an expert in hiding in corners of classrooms and singing little songs to myself in my head. But those corners will not protect me or anyone else from a person with a gun determined to kill. And those songs, while soothing, will not bring all the kids who have died in school shootings back to life. Children and their teachers across the country, across Iowa, across Cedar Rapids, live in fear of the day when their when comes. I have shared with you just a handful of stories surrounding lockdown drills and active shooter drills. There are so many more from my life that we simply don't have time for. I urge you to go out and vote. Use your voice to advocate for students like me so that maybe someday we can go through, there can be generations of kids who go through school without having these sorts of stories to tell. Thank you.
Okay, are there questions for Max or comments or points of discussion?
Yes.
Please.
Thank you, Max, for sharing that with us. What I want to know is all the training more helpful or is it just more painful?
That is an excellent question. I'm not sure I have a great answer to, but I'll try. So the way the school district currently requires it is that we do 4 lockdown drills every school year. So theoretically 1 each quarter. And that is routine. Every single student in the building goes through them. And it often raises the question of if a person in our building who is a member of our student body were to decide to partake in any sort of violence against us, they know exactly what we're all doing. They know where we are hiding. They know how we lock the doors and what we're preparing against that sort of violence. So it raises the question of, are we actually protecting ourselves from anything, or are we informing people exactly what to do should they make those decisions? And I don't know, because obviously I've not experienced that, nor am I considering it. But I do know there are like private schools in the area who don't participate in those drills because that is a concern. And I think for a lot of my classmates, now that we're older, it's less traumatic and more just gruesome and macabre that we know we are just almost doing some strange twisted theater of these lives that people have lived and then lost in these events. But for elementary school students, like I remember being terrified and kids crying and holding on to each other for dear life because we don't really at that age understand what's going on. And we're not prepared to handle it. And there's very little like, and now we're gonna bring in like a grief counselor to talk to you. You go through these 20 minutes of incredibly traumatic training, And then you go to a math lesson. Like we just move on like that's normal, and it shouldn't be normal.
Right, and then we have a follow-up question. So let's project in the future and let's say that you're a superintendent of Cedar Rapids schools.
Sure.
Some other school district.
Okay.
So you have a lot of say about what happens in the schools. So what would you do preschool through high school?
I mean, ideally, these aren't things we have to deal with. If we can put in place protections and systems for owning and acquiring guns and safety in our schools, in theory, these drills should never be a requirement. In a perfect world, we don't have to do these to begin with. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world. And I think it really boils down to, with younger students, bringing in both our parents into that conversation, but also things like counselors and therapists, because little kids don't understand what they're preparing for. Our comprehension of death is going to come in a lot later in our school career, from like preschool onward. So bringing it to each grade level, if it's going to be something we have to do continually, we're going to have to meet our kids where they are. It can't be the same system for high schoolers through preschoolers. And I'm not sure I know exactly what that system looks like, but I'm sure there's a better one. Yes.
Unit or something.
Yeah.
You do the first lockdown
You would
periods?
think, yeah. And largely what I think they have made an attempt to bring that into our classrooms now. We watch these videos, they're called like they're hide, run, fight or something, where it's a high school and the police come in and they run a simulated active shooting and suggest these 3 levels of the first thing you do is hide. And if they find you and you can't hide, you run. And if you can't run, you attack and physically engage in this person who is causing violence in your school. And so they've attempted to bring in those materials, but I'm not sure the way to do that is to force all of these students to watch a bunch of their peers across the country die, because that is what we are currently doing, and that's not working. And then, like I said, we do that, and then we go to band, or we go to choir, and we go to art class, and we pretend that's normal.
Don't you think the parents should prepare the child before they go to school?
I would like to think so. I was fortunate to grow up with parents who were active in my life and were concerned with what I was being told in my classroom. But I do know there are kids who do not have that luxury, and they do not have parents who can take, who don't have parents, or even if they do, don't have parents who can sit down and have those conversations with them. So I was very privileged in having a mother and father and grandparents and aunt and uncles who could have those conversations. But our schools are trying to account for everyone, and not everyone enjoys that. So I think there does have to be a role of our schools in some capacity, because for a lot of kids, those are the adult role models in their lives.
You know, if the schools are doing other things than drills, for instance, I don't know, backpack checks and restricted access or things like that, to try to avert this?
So we have not at Wash, or I went to Franklin in middle school. We did not do any of those sorts of things. The major system at Wash right now is we all carry IDs. They have our name and our student number and a picture of us on them. And to get in the doors of the school anytime other than the first like unlock period at the very beginning of the school day, you have to show that ID to get into the building. That doesn't work super well at a school like Wash. I don't know our familiarity with it, but Washington is built like a big L, and there are about 6 different doors and an entirely separate building from where our main office is. And that second building is where I spend most of my time. It's our fine arts building. We don't have buzzers on those doors, and that's where kids who leave campus most frequently need access to the building. So we do have a policy of like teachers and other students should not be letting kids into the building. You should have to go to the office. No one is doing that. We're all letting each other in, and that's just become normal. And I think that is largely a feature of we don't fully understand that this is something that is genuinely possible. And if you're my best friend in English class, why wouldn't I feel safe letting you in the building? So that is some challenges that are created both by the layout of the school I attend, and also just not quite being sure what to do in those situations. But as of right now, that is all the training as students we are receiving. I know our teachers go through some different things over the summer and over breaks. They're put in rooms at like the ELSC and they do some additional education, as well as things called soft lockdowns, where we don't lock all the doors and we hide in a corner, but we turn off all the lights and like we're really quiet. And I know teachers do a lot more training with those than students do. With students, they are like, we're doing preparation for the absolute worst scenario. Yeah.
Are there other students like you doing these public presentations and to adults who are going to be voting?
I'm sure that there are. I don't know. I couldn't give you a list of names, but I know Wash is a school, and Kennedy and Jefferson is a school full of students who are very dedicated to changing the world we are living in. And that comes in a kind of twofold scenario, because one has to ask the question, is it the responsibility of middle school and high school students to be changing the world, when we should theoretically be far more concerned with who we're going to prom with and if we're going to win the football game on Friday. And so I understand that I have made a choice to participate in these sorts of things, and that I am very much concerned with the changing of the world I live in. But at the end of the day, that isn't the responsibility of all my friends, or at least it shouldn't be. But we do have kids who are very involved in conversations like this, as well as conversations about like climate change and government policies in other facilities of our work. And Wash, very frequently, we hold a lot of student-run protests. If there is a thing to be protesting, the Warriors student body will be protesting. So we're busy in our own rooms, but I don't know how many of us are out in the community like this.
Are there policemen though in your high school?
There are. We call them student resource officers. We have a like small security team that is just like dudes who look like they might have played football or rugby at some point in their lives. And their job is essentially go around the school and look intimidating so that you're not skipping class or hanging out with your friends in the bathroom. And then we do have two like in uniform police officers on campus at all times. When I started at Wash, we only had one, and have since added a second one. And I don't know exactly what they do. I'm not running in the circle of kids that like they come check to make sure you don't have drugs in your backpack. I know they do things like that, but I have not really been involved with it. But I do know that is a point of tension in our student body. Wash is an incredibly diverse school. We are serving people of all communities and a lot of immigrants and people of color who are not comfortable with law enforcement being in our school all the time, kind of breathing down our necks. And so that provides a lot of challenges. As far as I know, those officers don't carry guns. They carry like tasers. I've never seen them used, but that doesn't mean they haven't been. And then I do know there will be events where we bring in outside police as well. They'll bring in extra cars. And I do know that there are people who come to school and have knives and other weapons taken from them, and that there is some police interaction in that, but they are not publicizing that to the student body because they don't want to cause a thing that doesn't need to be a thing. If the situation is handled, then most of the students ideally go through the day without knowing that it has happened at all. So it's a kind of give and take. They try really hard. They give us surveys every year to ask us how we feel about having police in our school. And they're like, the student resource officers, as we call them, they have an Instagram page where you can like ask them questions and like see what they're doing, which is kind of weird. And I don't interact with all that heavily, but they are I know attempting to make students feel comfortable with that. I just don't know that it's working.
There's a position that was established, I believe, last year, that was described in the paper a couple of days ago about an individual employed by the school, I think, who could help reconcile people who were in some kind of a fighting situation or argumentative, and she would talk with person one for 20 minutes and then go talk to person two for 20 minutes and try to find a way to resolve things.
Mhm.
Saying questions like, do you really think you need to fight? Or do you need to argue or whatever? And in the case that I had read about, the individual would say no. But they had learned or thought they had learned that that's the only way you could resolve things. Does anybody else remember reading?
I don't
this?
remember reading that.
Yeah.
About bullying, you know.
Yes, it's not actual guns, but
Yeah, Wash is a school. I know Jefferson and Kennedy are kind of a different playing field, but they see a lot of similar activity that Wash does. We have not as many fights as I think people like to make it sound like we do, but when we have them, they're often a big production. And that's part of because fights, for better or for worse, are entertaining when you're 14, and the most exciting thing that has happened all day is that your math teacher maybe let you spend 5 minutes on your phone. Like, fights are entertaining, whether they should be or not. I am on the party they should not. And so we do have a lot of challenges with, like, if there is a physical altercation, suddenly 300 kids are very invested in knowing about that, and that becomes part of the problem. But I think it also largely boils down to, like I said, Wash is incredibly diverse. And because of that, sometimes we face issues with kids from different people groups not getting along and not necessarily having the resources be given to them at school or at home to know what to do in that situation. And so fights do happen, and we do our best to reconcile those, but physical violence without weapons is very much a presence. It's just like, I know people with like their children or grandchildren are like, this is so terrible, it's happening all the time. It's not that bad. I haven't, like, we had one fight this year that I know about, and I didn't even know about it till 2 weeks after it happened. So I know we talk a lot about, like, high schoolers are all in gangs and we're all really violent. Most of us are trying to survive. But there is, like, we do, I believe it's through Abbey Health, we bring in like a trained therapist to talk to kids and are working on creating those healthier relationships and conflict resolution. But there's only so much you can do with a junior or senior in high school when they're not receiving that information from elementary school forward. And so we're trying to put in a lot of the work when it's a little bit later than that work needs to be put in. And I think that does create some of the challenges with it, but we try real hard. They don't want us fighting. They try and fix it. And that's probably something they've been trying to fix since high school was created and will be till it ends.
Are there, you mentioned that therapist that's brought in, how often does that therapist come in, and what are the mental health resources available? Do you know?
I don't. So when I was in middle school, this sort of Abbey Health partnership was a pretty new thing. And I was told they were coming in like twice a month. And I was even theoretically supposed to be meeting with that person. That never happened. But that program was brand new when I was dealing with it. So I would like to imagine it has since improved significantly. At Wash, we do have our 4 counselors, but they're really there for, like, are you getting into college and are you going to pass all your classes? They're not in the, like, mental health training as much. And so to my understanding, we are bringing in that outside person a couple of times a month or throughout a semester to meet with students on like a sign up or recommendation basis.
Okay.
So it would be like, I am having a problem at home. I'm going to put my name on a list, or you as my teacher are seeing that I'm really struggling with something. You're putting my name on a list. And so that's, to my understanding, how that works. But we do throughout the year, we'll have teachers who are like, we're going to do this now. And they bring in someone of their own accord. I know our drama department, we're bringing in a grief counselor this year to talk about those sorts of things with our students, because the musical we're doing this year is anti-violence. But as we know, in order to be anti-violence, there has to be violence. So we are doing our best at Wash to bring in those resources, but I have not interacted with that program directly, so I'm not entirely certain how it works.
I can speak to that piece because I know that Johnson Elementary and McKinley STEAM Academy both have an outside person, and the disconnect here is because the contract gets awarded based on the funding, right? So at one point it was Abbey Health, and now I think it's Tanager. And so in order to meet with these mental health professionals, the parent has to sign the medical waivers and the things. And then there's a disconnect because the therapy is interrupted over the summer. So if you're seeing somebody and you're making progress or not, you don't have a way to continue that over the summer. And if you switch schools, there's a disconnect again. So I would hope that Wash has one of these people, and
We're hoping.
it's just extremely unfortunate
Yeah.
that it's not better advertised.
Yes.
Or maybe Wash doesn't, maybe the funding dried up, I don't know. But there was definitely an effort. And I think, again, it has to do with, pre-pandemic, if you have a certain number of the population that was receiving free and reduced lunch, then you're more likely to qualify for these grants and the things. Because there should be
Yes.
more mental health resources in the program. And like I said, I know that at the elementary and middle school level, but you had to have parent signature. Once you get to high school, some of those kids are emancipated, some of those don't need parent signature. So I'm not quite sure what that would look like there.
Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that. So that's good to hear. Yeah, at the end of the day, we all know money is always a big factor in whatever we're doing for our kids.
Any more questions for Max or thoughts?
I'd just like to say you're a very eloquent speaker.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an excellent question. I should figure that out. No, I'm currently planning to get a Bachelor of Fine Arts in musical theater, and then double major in technical theater and work in the arts. But
Sounds right up your alley.
yeah.
Do you know where you're going?
I do not yet. I'm currently in the application process.
All right.
I think you should do something in the way of politics.
People tend to argue that. My sister is currently pursuing the early systems of a law degree. For me, I genuinely believe the arts are going to be the thing that's going to change the world. And so for me, in that, it's in a theater or on a stage, but I'll be around. So
All right, well, thank you again.
thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to too. Yes. Max and Rob, you can stay for this part if you want, but don't feel you have to if you have somewhere to go.
You listen to Max, we can listen to
Okay. So no slides, no slides. I'm sorry that we're not going to have slides. So you're just going to have to listen to me talk.
May I make some comments?
Of course, go right ahead.
But I don't want to come in and preclude what you're having to say. I just want to make some comments about the gun industry.
Mhm. Go ahead. Do
it.
you want to come up here? Is there anyone on Zoom or not?
It's all being recorded,
Okay,
but it won't get recorded if you don't speak.
Okay, I don't want to.
go ahead.
Okay, how many of you do take the Time magazine? If any of you
Any
do,
more?
if any of you do, this is in the September 12th issue of the Time magazine. And I have to admit that I was a little bit ticked when I walked into Kennedy High School a couple of years ago and they asked for my ID. I mean, this was after 25 years of teaching there. Who are they to ask me about this? I knew about the whole school. My husband had even helped design the school. And yet I was being told that I needed to show an ID. Okay, the article here in the Time magazine is headed by selling guns. Whoops, there goes that. Well, I don't have to listen to you anyway. Selling guns to Americans with advertising and anxiety. There's two words, two key words. Guns used to be sold to Americans primarily as tools, all right? They were advertised next to plows in agricultural magazines. Now the country's gun industry is focused on selling military-style weapons to consumers who care about protecting the family and property, and a marketing shift that tells the story of a dramatic evolution in the role of firearms in the United States and American life. And the author here quotes a book called The Gunning of America and the four gun manufacturing titans in the 1800s, Winchester, Colt, Remington, Smith, and Western, relied most heavily on international contracts to survive. As that era faded, the industry turned its attention to supplying consumers back home. Okay, and by then, the US, that had become a less agricultural society, was home to a new kind of gun buyer. Okay, and the gun, a new kind of gun then emerged, marketing weapons as necessary for self-defense. Be prepared against country road holdups. Okay, I lived in the country, all right. One early 20th century Colt proclaimed that ads were keeping a gun pistol tucked between the car seat cushions or in a lady's handbag. There's a lot of effort to create a sense of fear, to create a sense that guns were still needed. There were natural changes, of course, in consumer demand, and we have now fewer hunters, more people who want guns for self-defense. So of course, we're going to advertise accordingly. The connection between these messages and ideas about masculinity is deep-seated in the late 1910s. Ads for Winchester maintained that the real boys deserved to own a gun. But the link between masculinity and fear accelerated dramatically in the 21st century. Argues another former gun industry executive. He says that the modern gun industry was born after the 1999 Columbine school shooting, which left 13 victims dead, and that NPR has published secret tapes that revealed the National Rifle Association representatives talking out their response to the shooting. And they basically had debates behind the scenes. Okay, we give in and be conciliatory, or we basically use these sorts of events to stir up hatred and fear and division and all the stuff that rules our politics now. Bussey says, and the author says here, and They obviously chose the latter because the industry scored major legislative victories during George Bush administration. And also then Barack Obama with the attendant conspiracy theories, including Bitherism and false claims that the administration was planning to seize or restrict the sale of guns. That marked another turning point. These have usually been carried out by young men, these militarized firearms that we have seen have been carried out by young men with military style rifles purchased legally. Famously in 2012, Bushmaster, a subsidiary of Remington that specialized in the assault rifles, said, consider your man card reissued. Consider your man card reissued. And later that year, a Bushmaster rifle was used in the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting that left 26 people dead in 2020. Remington filed for bankruptcy and sold off the Bushmaster brand. And in 2022, the company agreed to a $73 million settlement with the Sandy Hook parents. This author of this book estimates that 3 million to 7 million guns are sold each year for uses like hunting, target shooting, but he says preying on pandemic insecurities was what drove annual sales of certain guns over the 10 million mark in 2020. Much of the advertising is wrapped up, he says, in all the things that create fear in our society. Okay, so maybe we better be focusing on some of the things that create fear in our society, maybe in our social studies classes at Kennedy High School and other high schools.
Thank you.
Julie. I'm going to focus on the state of Iowa now. Under Iowa law, in order to amend the state constitution, 2 sessions of the Iowa legislature need to meet and pass a measure, which happened in the Republican-controlled Iowa legislature. They passed a measure that will go to the voters this November 8th. There will be an opportunity to vote on whether or not we want to amend the Iowa state constitution. This has been a kind of a tactic or a strategy that the Republican right has been using as of late across the country. Besides Iowa, going to a vote in Iowa, Missouri, Louisiana, and Alabama also have this in what I'm going to tell you about in their state constitution. And the strategy was to get it on the ballot for voters to vote on and to make sure the wording is confusing enough. And in this case, it's going to be on the back of the ballot. So people are going to have to know that they have to turn over the ballot in order to vote on this. So we are voting on this on November 8th. There is a coalition that was formed about a year ago. It's called Iowans for Responsible Gun Laws. And I've been participating in this coalition as a member of the Iowa Unitarian Universalist Witness and Advocacy Board, and for my involvement in the Cedar Rapids chapter, Moms Demand Action for Gun Sets. And we're calling this amendment the Reckless Gun Amendment. So whatever you hear about this amendment today, besides educating you, I hope you take this information back to everybody you know in Iowa, neighbors, friends, families, and talk to them about the same thing. Each time in the Iowa legislature that this bill was put forth to amend the Iowa Constitution to make guns more accessible than they already are, The Democrats in the legislature voted against it, all of them. However, because the Republicans outnumber the Democrats, it passed. So that's what's going to be on the ballot this November. The actual wording of what will be on the ballot and what would be added to the Iowa Constitution if it passes is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The sovereign state of Iowa affirms and recognizes this right to be a fundamental individual right. Any and all restrictions to this right shall be subject to strict scrutiny. And those are the important words right there, strict scrutiny. The supporters of this amendment are leading people to believe that it is simply a reiteration of the Second Amendment, which is in the US Constitution, but it's not. It goes a lot further than the Second Amendment in the US Constitution. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The proposed Iowa amendment says, it goes further than that, and it says, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The sovereign state of Iowa affirms and recognizes this right to be a fundamental individual right, and any and all restrictions to this right shall be subject to strict scrutiny. The Second Amendment is not subject to strict scrutiny, but if this proposed amendment passes, it will be. So what is strict scrutiny? And I'm not a lawyer, so I'll try to explain as best as I can, but it is the highest level of scrutiny that a court uses to decide whether a law that comes before it is constitutional or not, the highest level. So inserting gun rights with strict scrutiny into the Constitution will tip the balance of power, elevating access to guns above public health and safety. So some of the current gun laws that we have, for example, such as felons are not allowed to carry guns, could be tested in the courts, and with the strict scrutiny clause in that the courts have to follow, it would be really hard to make a case to say that that law should be continued or not, if it ever should be challenged. So Missouri has this in their constitution, and Missouri ranks 5th in the nation for US gun deaths. Alabama has it in their constitution, and they rank 4th in the nation for gun deaths. And Louisiana has it, and they rank 3rd in the nation for gun deaths. So
Where does Iowa currently rank?
where's what?
Where does Iowa currently rank as far as gun deaths?
I'm going to get to that. So even responsible gun owners are concerned about this amendment, and gun dealers as well, because they fear it could prohibit reasonable, responsible safety measures such as universal background checks at the state level, gun safety training requirements, and requiring a license to carry a gun in public. Now, all 3 of those are already outlawed in the state of Iowa by law. So if a group or a person were to challenge those laws, the courts would be, again, forced to look at it with the highest level of strict scrutiny in terms of its constitutionality. So Iowa voters think a little differently than the Iowa legislature. These are statistics from a Change Research survey that was done of Iowa voters a year ago, September 2021. 91 support banning carrying a firearm while under the influence of drugs and alcohol. 85% of Iowans support prohibiting felons from possessing firearms. 85% support requiring background checks on all gun purchases. and 83 support requiring gun safety courses before the purchase of a handgun. Those are big majorities. 72 support extreme risk protection laws that would allow police or family members to request a judge temporarily remove guns from people who may be a danger to themselves or to others. According to the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence, 1 American is shot every 5 minutes. 1 American dies by gunfire every 14 minutes. 323 Americans are shot and 104 die every day. So gun violence is a public health crisis. Even though still federal law prohibits the CDC from researching gun violence as a public health crisis, it is a public health crisis. It is the number, according to the New England Journal of Medicine 2020, it is the number cause of death for children. Number 1 cause of death for children. Black Americans are disproportionately impacted by gun violence. They experience 10 times the gun homicides, 18 times the gun assault injuries, and nearly 3 times the fatal police shootings than of white Americans. And women are 21 times more likely to be murdered with a gun in the US than in any other high-income country. So in Iowa, on the average, these statistics are from Every Town for Gun Safety. 302 people die by guns on average each year in Iowa. There's been an 80% increase in homicides by gun in Iowa from 2019 to 2020. That's from the AP News, with a headline entitled "Gun Deaths Rising in Iowa as New Law Removes Handgun Permits." So 80%, and that is even before the pandemic, from 2019 to 2020. And 78% of all gun deaths are suicides in Iowa. So the impact if this amendment passes, this reckless gun amendment passes, is that every common sense gun law, either currently on the books or any future ones that may be proposed, will be at risk. And that means, of course, Iowans will be at even more risk, including children and our communities. So please vote no on the reckless gun amendment on November 8th and ask your families, friends, and neighbors to do so. We've got yard signs here for your front yard. Take as many as you like. There's some more still out there by the door of the office, and give them to people in Iowa, your friends, your neighbors. Get those yard signs up, because a lot of people are going to go to the polls and they're not going to have any idea about this thing on the back of the ballot. The website for the coalition that's working on this is IowansForResponsibleGunLaws.com. There are 34 Iowa groups or organizations that are part of this coalition, and People's Church is represented by the Iowa UU Witness and Advocacy Network Board. And Iowans for Responsible Gun Laws, besides having a website, has a Facebook page, so you can like it on Facebook, and then everybody who likes you on Facebook will see it. And they also have a Twitter page. So, any questions? Vote no. Kathy.
This isn't a question, this is a comment.
Sure.
At Benedictine People's Church has Benedictine, we talked about this at our last meeting, and members of that group have donated $78 towards the group.
Oh, but Iowans for Responsible Gun Laws?
Yep.
Great, wonderful.
So, because I was thinking, the signs cost money. So.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Other questions or comments? How are you going to vote? Huh?
The Gazette had a good article about it. Unfortunately, not enough people get the paper anymore.
Yeah,
You know,
I know.
So that makes it harder to get the information.
Yeah, it
It needs
does.
to be on social media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's where so many people are getting
Mm-hmm.
their information.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
I can get blocked by more people.
Mhm.
There will be political debates coming up here.
Yes.
And maybe they'll get questions related to this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how many debates are on PBS or wherever they are, you know?
I think the League of Women Voters is having a debate on October something.
12th and 19th.
So, yeah, sometime in October with,
19th and 18th, 12th and 18th. Well, that's Mathis.
yeah, the congressional candidates, certainly not the governor, I don't think, or the Senate. Yeah.
It would be interesting to know how they handle this in other countries.
Handle what?
They don't have a second amendment. So that's
Yeah.
something.
Right. Right. And of course, we all know that gun violence in other countries, countries in Europe and other developed countries is very, very low.
It's top of the line.
Yeah, you're right, for sure. Okay. Then thank you, and thank you again to Max and Rob.
Questions from the people on.
We don't have anybody on.
Oh, okay.
All right. Thank you. Take the yard signs, people. Please.
Yeah.